welcome back to Ashar Books. So today I'm going to do another installment, I guess you'd say, in my trope recommendation videos. I've been having a lot of fun kind of coming up with the recommendations, and I think you guys are enjoying them. So today I'm going to be doing Hate to Love. So I think Hate to Love is one of the fan favorite tropes. I know it's one of my favorite tropes. I think, you know, when you have that fine line between love and hate, it just makes for a really angsty, really sometimes romantic, and just drama-filled romance. So to me, it's one of my favorites. So I'm gonna give you guys, I think I've got 6 recommendations here. I did want to mention that I could literally probably recommend 20 hate to love romances if you do like YA and regular adult. I kind of stuck with more new adult and adult recommendations, and I only did about 6 or 7. But if you guys have any recommendations that I haven't said you'd like to share, I would love to see them down below so that way I can check them out and anyone else who's looking for more recommendations can check them out. So definitely just leave a couple down below that are your favorites if I don't mention them today. But I tried to pick a few that are from a few different subgenres, as well as ones that maybe are a little bit less known, that maybe not as many people have checked out. Okay, after I just said they're less known, I did have to start off with this one just to kind of put it out there. The Hating Game by Sally Thorne. If you haven't picked this one up, I highly recommend it. I feel like this is kind of the most popular hate to love book out there, at least right now. This one's wonderful. It's about Joshua and Lucy. They work in the same office, and they've always had this kind of rivalry and very animosity driven kind of relationship, but obviously it turns into more, and it turns into a really adorable romance. So just quickly, if you haven't read it, definitely recommend. It's great. So the next one I want to recommend is one I haven't talked about too much on this channel, and that is Abby Klein's Fallen Too Far. But I'm a huge Abby Klein's fan. It was one of the first authors I started reading when I read new adult type books. This one is, to me, kind of a hate to love, at least at first, with a little asterisk. So it's about Rush and Blair, and Blair, her mom passes away, so she has to go kind of live with her dad, who is not the nicest person at the beginning, but she has nowhere else to go. So she shows up to his beach house with his new wealthy family, and he's not there. But the person who is there is his stepson, Rush, and basically Rush doesn't really want anything to do with Blair, and Blair just doesn't know what to do. She doesn't have anywhere else to go, so she's kind of trying to make the best out of the situation. So they are step siblings, but it's his mom and her dad, so there's no it's not a blood relation or anything, but obviously it's pretty forbidden. So this one kind of has a few tropes in there, so that's why I was a little I guess we'll throw it in. But it's one of my favorite angsty, drama-filled series, so definitely read this one if you want something just really fast-paced and interesting. So it definitely starts off as hate to love, but it kind of quickly becomes more. So that's the only thing. It's not drawn out. If you're looking for a hate to love that's very drawn out, this one may not be for you. But if you just want a hate to love that's burning with angst, try this one. My next suggestion is a fantasy romance, and that is A Promise of Fire by Amanda Boucher. I talked about this series a lot last year when I read it, and I actually haven't read the 3rd one. I need to finish this series, but I kind of had put it off just because I loved it so much. Doesn't make sense, I know. But the first 2 are fantastic, and the first one definitely to me is a hate to love, almost like enemies to lovers, which is basically the same thing, right? So in this story we have Kat, who has these magical kind of abilities, but she's kind of been hiding because of who her mother is. And then we have Griffin, who, if I'm remembering correctly, his kind of his family kind of won this war, so they've kind of taken over an area, and he really wants to kind of use Kat for her magical abilities. Obviously, being kind of used for something doesn't really make you like that person. So to start off, Kat and Griffin are definitely very butting heads. They do not agree on much, and I think it's very driven by that. However, obviously Griffin kind of realizes he wants her for more than just her abilities, and it turns into a really good romance. I can't suggest this series enough. The first 2 were fantastic. I just think it's a great fantasy romance in general. It had a lot of romance, but also had a lot of fantasy elements. It was a good blend. So yeah, if you want something with kind of the enemies to lovers, I definitely like this one. They're kind of from 2 separate sides. My next recommendation is Bully by Penelope Douglas, and I read this one a long time ago. I think I probably read it maybe 4 years ago, whenever it first came out, which I think was around 2015, 2014, and I loved it. It's definitely it's a new adult. the characters are in high school, at least to start off with, but it definitely reads as a new adult or more mature book. So in this book, we have Jared and Tate. I hope I'm getting those names right. It's been a little bit since I've read it, but they grew up as best friends and they like love hanging out with each other. They did everything together. They were very close. Then something happens when Jared is a teenager. I think he's around like 15, maybe 16, and he comes back that summer and he is just not a nice person. He is awful. He is like kind of tormenting Tate. He's kind of just making her life horrible at school, outside of school. He just does everything in his power to kind of make her life hard. And so she goes away for a study abroad program for like a year, comes back for her senior year and is like, you know what? I'm done with his crap. I'm going to stand up to him and figure out what is going on, because he goes from friends to enemies so fast. So basically that's kind of the story. Now I will say some people I know had a bit of a problem with how Jared treated Tate, and I will say it's not acceptable at all. But I do think you do find out the reasons for what is happening, and it does make more sense. I think by the end of the book, you really believe them as a couple. It's very drama filled. It's very angsty, as a lot of like new adult is. But I loved kind of seeing them kind of fall back into their friendship, because they did start off as friends first for a long time. So I don't know. I love this book. I love all of Penelope Douglas's books. They're really great, or at least the ones I've read so far. So Bully's a great one if you want that kind of enemies to lovers type of vibe. My next recommendation is The Royal Treatment by MJ Summers, or Melanie Summers. I think she goes by both. This is one I read last year as well, and it's 3 books, and they're kind of a royal romance. So this book's a little different, and I just loved it. It's very funny. It's definitely like a romantic comedy, but the 2 main characters are for sure hate to love. So our main character is a journalist, and she runs this blog that's basically critiquing and saying how much she hates the royal family. Basically just kind of goes through everything she thinks they're doing wrong. Well, the royal family does know about this, and certain situations happen where they need good publicity and they need the people to kind of like them more again. So they think, what better way to get that good publicity than bring in the really critical journalist into the palace and kind of turn her mind around and have her see, you know, hey, maybe there's more to them than they think or that meets the eye. So the love stories between her and the prince, it was great. I loved it. It definitely, to me, was a bit of a slow burn. Obviously, if you go from someone critiquing your entire family to, you know, falling in love, it's a long road. But by the end of the first book, I think you really see where they're both coming from. I love seeing the both sides of it. I thought that was really interesting, having the like journalistic kind of side and like, you know, the public side, and then having the side of the royal family. Obviously this is all made up, it's a fictionalized country and everything, but it was just really interesting. So if you're looking for a royal romance and also hate to love, this one's a great one to check out. The next one is How to Date a Douchebag by Sarah Nye, I think it is. This one's great as well. This is definitely a new adult sports romance. For this one, they're definitely hate to love at the beginning, but it's another one that they do kind of rather quickly become like friends. So in this one, if I'm remembering correctly, because I'm hoping I'm not blending books in my head, but our main character is kind of asked / like forced to tutor the main character, who is a jock, and it's just one of those where they both really are looking at each other's like face value, but they're not looking at any deeper. They're kind of looking at what their perception of each other is, and they kind of figure out that it's very off. And I just like that. I'm a complete sucker for like a nerd and a jock kind of figuring out that they have more in common than they think. So this one is definitely great. This whole series by Sarah Nye is fantastic. It's so funny. So if you want something that definitely has that comedy in it while also being hate to love, it also has a sports aspect to it. So I think this one's great for someone who just wants a little bit of everything, but also has that trope in there. So love How to Date a Douchebag. It also has the funniest title. I mean, it's so funny, right? And my last recommendation is Where I Belong by J. Daniels. This one actually has a new cover now, but I bought this years ago, so I still have the older cover. This is her first book in her Alabama Summer series, which is such a good like new adult contemporary series. If you haven't read it, It's great. So this first one is about Mia and Ben, and Mia and Ben grew up knowing each other. Mia is Ben's sister's best friend, and so they always knew each other, but they just kind of grew up with Ben pretty much tormenting Mia. Nothing like as drastic as like in bully, I'd say, but just like annoying her, you know, like he would get mad at her for things, you know, he would kind of be like, oh, I don't want you trailing after us, that kind of thing, with like the younger sister vibe. So they've just never gotten along. It's always been a very like, I don't want you around me kind of situation. So obviously this one skips ahead. I think it's like the summer after high school when they're going to college soon, I believe, and Mia comes to stay with her best friend, and then Ben's there. So it's like years later, because Ben is a few years older than Mia as well. And obviously it turns into a love story, and it is great. It turns into one of the sweetest love stories. I just love this love story. Mia and Ben just really fit together. So it's so interesting seeing them go from like really not digging each other to really fitting together really well, and kind of seeing what was there all along. Obviously there's a lot of like backstory as well to like what was going on. Ben also has a young son, which is adorable, Nolan, in this book. So if you haven't picked up this series, definitely start with this one, which is the first book. I loved it. I kind of want to reread it. It's fantastic. Alright guys, so those are my recommendations for hate to love romances. Definitely, like I said, let me know down below what some of your favorites are, especially if I didn't mention them here. I would absolutely love to know. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!